I have people coming to me, some people in Congress, sir, can you get this deal done immediately? I said, it doesn't work that way. I don't want to go too fast. The deal's not going to be any good if we do that. We got to take time. It's got to gestate, right? The word gestate. It's like when you're cooking a chicken. Time. Turkey for Thanksgiving. My mother would say, oh, 8 hours. I said, 8 hours? She made the greatest turkey I've ever had. Takes time.
Welcome back to AM Joy. Well, the word is definitely not gestate. At the end of a very bad week for Donald Trump, one can't help but ask, is he unraveling? My next guest, who has known Trump for some 15 years, has said when watching the president in the White House, quote, his mental decline could not be denied. And joining me now is Omarosa Manigault Newman, former White House aide and author of Unhinged, an insider's account of the Trump White House, which is currently sitting at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Congratulations on that, and good morning, Omarosa.
Good morning, Joy. Welcome back from vacation.
Thank you very much. Yes, a lot happened while I was gone. A lot. I was like, I'm missing all of this. Okay, so you just saw that clip of Donald Trump speaking at an event where he's talking about gestating turkeys. When you see that, do you still see the person that you met 15 years ago? Or, as, I mean, you've written in the book, and I read it in a fast 24 hours, do you see a man in mental decline?
I see a person who, conned his way into the White House and is trying to use his limited intellect to try to kind of fool people. But when you see him give speeches like that, then you know firsthand why I titled this book called Unhinged, because he truly is unraveling. He's showing signs of decline, instability, impulsivity, and he has a struggle with the truth, as we saw so very clearly this week, Joy.
You talk in the book about him being isolated, about him being lonely in the White House. You talk about him having about a 9th grade reading level. You sort of really go into detail about the things about him that are sort of falling apart. Were those things true when you met him? You talk about your own history coming up in the Westlake projects, coming from Ohio. You go through 2 HBCUs. You work for the Clinton administration. You try out for The Apprentice. And part of what you did in your audition process to land that gig was to study Donald Trump, to study everything about him, to try to essentially become him, a sort of a female version of him. As you really looked into who he was, is that what you saw? A person who is not intelligent, a person who's not articulate, a person who's sort of out there and odd?
Joy, when I met Donald Trump back in 2003, I remember the first moment I walked into the boardroom and he came out. He was so sharp. I would even say I thought he was brilliant. The reason why I wanted to go on The Apprentice, because I wanted to win and to lead one of his companies. And what he did during The Apprentice was nothing short of just a huge success. 28 million people watched us, and he was an incredible entertainer. Unfortunately, as the years have gone on, Donald Trump has not in any way expanded his capability. In fact, what we've seen is this huge decline in his ability to process difficult information. One of the shocking things in the first year of the White House is that he didn't read any of the legislation. He never read any of the executive orders, and even the basic notes that I outlined for him for listening sessions or tours or meetings, he struggled with. And it's kind of concerning as to whether or not he is still fit to carry out his duties of this office.
A lot of people have I'm sure, have talked to you personally about it, and in interviews that you've done have talked about sort of your perception of Donald Trump now being racist. But going back to when you first met him, whether that perception was out. A quote from your book, you said, as I thought at the time, your perception of him, he's racial in that he uses race and race relations to manipulate people. And this was at the time in 2015. You also, you were an Obama supporter. You were a supporter of President Obama. You also talk in the book about him hating Barack Obama. And that's going back to 2007, 2008, that he hated him, that he thought of him as a phony, and that he complained about him, that he was a birther. Did those things at the time make you think, wait, this guy's not just racial, he might be racist?
Thank you so much for asking the question, because I think it's important. I don't want to really get into an academic discussion, which was what I was having when we were talking in 2015 about the difference. But I can give you a very clear example of racist versus racial. When Donald Trump started attacking NFL players about kneeling, he only attacked African-American athletes. And it wasn't him calling out and saying he was racist, but he was being racial. He was trying to stir up his base by using an issue that he knew that his base would gravitate to see him attack wealthy, prominent African-American men wasn't necessarily saying they were racist, that he's being racist, but he was being racial because he's intent on starting a race war. That's what I believe.
And when you talk about his attitude toward President Obama, you said that you perceived that the reason he disliked President Obama and was so fixated on him was because Obama was black. Did you perceive that at the time in 07, 08?
In 07, 08, no, but the moment that we got into the White House and they compiled this list of all of Obama's greatest accomplishments, and he and Steve Millen and Steve Bannon sought out to dismantle everything that President Obama accomplished, even if it meant it would be harmful to this country and harmful to the commitments that he made on the campaign trail. It did not matter. If it was one of the major things that President Obama accomplished, Donald Trump wanted to dismantle it. For example, the Affordable Care Act. I mean, he doesn't care if Americans have health care, because if it's called Obamacare, he wants to destroy it, whether it's good or bad for this country. And I think that that's very dangerous, Joy.
Yeah. I want to play for you a little clip from a presser that you do write about in the book that you said was hurtful to you when you saw it at the time. This is during the campaign. It was April of 2016. These are 6 of your fellow former Apprentice contestants, including friend of the show, Tara Dowdell, Randall Pinkett, Kwame Jackson, speaking out against Trump's candidacy.
Yes.
And they came out and they said flat out, Donald Trump is racist. And you write, at the time when you watched that, I flashed back, you write, to the taping in season 1 of The Apprentice and rumors I'd heard ever since of Trump describing Kwame as uppity. You also write in the book that when you were fired, you believed it was because of your knowledge of a tape of Donald Trump using the N-word potentially about Kwame Jackson. During the campaign, when your fellow cast members are out there saying, this man is a racist, you, as somebody who knew him probably better than they did, you said you spent time in the boardroom on purpose. You got yourself in there to get to know him better. How did you not come to that same conclusion?
You know, hindsight is 20/20, Joy, and certainly I wish I could have seen what they saw. And I write about how painful it was to watch them say those things, because I hadn't come to that realization. I had this blind spot for him. But I can tell you that watching them talk, and I have such respect for Randall Pinkett, who actually served as the first African-American apprentice, and he started talking about things that I didn't know was going on in the Trump organization, the culture of deceit, lies, backstabbing, that sort of things. These are the things that I did not know, but Randall shared. It was really hard to watch that, but I think in Unhinged you see that it just slowly evolves, this realization that Donald Trump is not the person that he said he was.
Yeah, I want to come to some of the other stuff that's in the book, because there's some wow moments in the book that I haven't heard anyone talk about yet. Maybe since when I was in England, maybe you guys did talk about it. You had a conversation with Steve Bannon. When people talk about the racism of this White House, of them bringing white nationalism indoors, Steve Bannon is usually the first name that most people think about. You asked him if he was racist. You write, I asked Bannon if the rumors of his being racist were true. He said no. He explained, quote, the same way you are a proud African-American woman, I am a proud white man. What's the difference between my pride and your pride? What did you think when you heard that?
Well, I have to tell you, Steve Bannon was always straightforward about who he is, where he stood. He was unapologetic, and I wanted to understand what his perspectives, where they came from, where they birthed this type of kind of hate and this alignment with white supremacists. And he explained very clearly that he was a proud white man. And, you know, I tried to push back, but if you've ever sat, and I don't know if you have, but I've had a chance to sit down and actually talk to him. And it's actually scary in some ways. It's for him to not see how harmful the alignment with white supremacists and the alt-right, the harm it's doing to this nation and the very fabric of who we are and what we're built on.
Were you uncomfortable serving in an administration with Steve Bannon, people like Stephen Miller, who has an association, at least according to Richard Spencer, with Richard Spencer, that kind of thing?
Joy, I've worked in corporate America for 20 years. I've worked with people who are closeted racist, openly racist. I'm a black woman in America. Yeah. The truth of the matter is you're going to encounter people who have very, very hateful views. And I have learned, as most African-American professionals have learned, to navigate and see that it's not always kind to African-Americans, but you still have to some way find a way to thrive and persevere.
Sure. Another story that you tell in the book is about Meredith McIver, who for a while people were sure there was a Meredith McIver. I don't know if you remember that, when she essentially took the fall, took the blame for Melania Trump plagiarizing Michelle Obama's speech at the Republican convention. You write, they chose McIver as the sacrificial lamb, but they needed to keep her under control, so she was not fired. If they had fired her, she would have been free to tell the world any number of Trump world secrets. Before you sort of expound on what you think those secrets might have been, you also talk about her being a woman of color, which I don't think anybody knew.
Yeah, first of all, she's brilliant. She's a brilliant writer. She helped to write most of, or maybe 2 or 3 Donald Trump's books. And I was very surprised when they said that she was the reason that Melania's speech looked so much like Michelle Obama, because I know how incredibly smart she is, and that's not something that she would have done, and which is why it was important for me to tell the truth about the fact that she had to fall on a sword. She wanted to resign, but they wouldn't let her, because as you saw with this kind of offer I got from Laura Trump to maintain, to stay in the Trump world, they want to control you, they want to silence you, they want to buy you off, and not to say that that's what she did. She stayed in the organization, but I can attest that she's a brilliant woman that would have never just taken a whole paragraph and plagiarized it and put it in Melania's speech.
Knowing her, do you think that she would do as David Pecker and some others have done and go to Robert Mueller and agree to talk about what she knows about the Trump organization?
I would just say to that sister, protect yourself. Protect yourself. As you can see with Alan and the other people, and David, who was my former boss at AMI, they're all protecting themselves. They're going and they're going to tell their story, but they're not going to have to face any kind of criminal charges with that immunity. If she has an opportunity to protect herself, I would say it's important for her to do so.
You talk about David Pecker from AMI. He became your boss after you yourself had an encounter with the National Enquirer with a reporter attending secretly the funeral of your brother, I believe. And then them going to publish a story about you, but Donald Trump intervening, getting them to pull the story and offer you a job. So you've been in this.
They actually ran this story, Joy.
Okay.
They ran the story about my brother's murder, and they sent this reporter who pretended to be a mourner and came to the funeral, and she took little clips from my eulogy for my brother and wrote it in the story as if she interviewed me.
And then how did you wind up going from that to working for David Pecker?
Yeah, that's one of the things I talk about in Unhinged, is that Donald Trump calls me. Here's my friend, my mentor, somebody I respect. And he called and he said, I understand that you're going to sue the National Enquirer. What you don't know is that the National Enquirer is owned by my good friend, David Pecker. And surely there's something that we can do instead of you spending thousands and thousands of dollars on lawyers and taking him to court. Surely we can find a better resolution. Now, you know, as you see in the book, I had tremendous amount of respect for Donald. I did not know David Pecker was his good friend, nor did I know this practice of catch and kill these stories, or in this case, try to put down a lawsuit. And so after the negotiation, as you'll see in Unhinged, yes, I ended up becoming the West Coast editor of OK Magazine and Reality Weekly and working for David Pecker for 2 whole years. And that's a whole separate book, Joy, I could write about working for David Pecker and publications like The Enquirer and Star Magazine.
I'm sure. You talk about befriending David Cohen early on, before the campaign. Were you surprised?
Michael Cohen?
Michael Cohen. Sorry, Michael Cohen.
Yeah.
Were you surprised when he turned on Donald Trump?
First of all, I adore Michael Cohen. I've never hid that. I think you see that, how much I adore him in the book. And I am sad to see him going through what he's going through. I adore his wife. His daughter was my intern at the White House. She's brilliant. I am really, really saddened, moreover, to see Donald Trump kick Michael Cohen while he's down, while praising Paul Manafort. I mean, Michael Cohen did everything he was asked to do. He was directed to make those payments by the President of the United States. He was completely loyal. He was a loyal soldier, carrying out all of the things that he was instructed to do by Donald Trump, who was the general.
And do you think that he has evidence that would be material to the Russiagate portion of the Muellergate investigation?
He has that and much more. Michael Cohen knows all about all of Donald Trump's dirty secrets, all his dirty deals, all of his corruption. And I'm glad that Michael Cohen is going to actually participate and cooperate with these investigations, because the American people have a right to know what's going on and who truly they elected to be president of the United States.
You know other players in the Donald Trump universe that you do write about in the book. Who else do you think might come forward? You know Keith Schiller, who was Donald Trump's longtime bodyguard. Do you think that he is somebody that might come forward? Are there others that Donald Trump should be worried about?
Keith signed one of those agreements that they offered me. I believe he's being paid $15,000 a month. When you sign on, you sign this incredible NDA that does not allow you to talk or share those stories. And so essentially he's been silent. I don't know what he can and cannot do under that agreement, but all I know is he did enter an agreement that does not allow him to talk in any negative way about Donald Trump.
And you say in the book that you were made uncomfortable by Paul Manafort when he came on to the campaign. Why?
Well, Paul Manafort was always looking out for himself. He never talked about how this could advance the campaign. He always tried to position as to how different decisions and policy could help to advance him and Rick Gates. And even when I talked to him about issues that were concerning to the African American community, he was very dismissive because he didn't see the end game for him.
I want to come back to I know somebody who knows you, who's known you for a long time, who, when they found out that I was going to be talking to you, had things that they wanted to know. Just having known you back in the day when you worked for Hillary Clinton. I'm not going to tell you who it is. And one of the questions they had
You're not gonna
was,
at least tell me who it is.
No. One of the questions that they had, lots of people have asked me questions like, oh, please ask Omarosa this, and a lot of them revolve around things like the Central Park Five. You studied Donald Trump. You studied who he was. You were very honest in the book about seeing his misogyny, about watching him on the set be very vulgar toward women, about him being creepy toward his daughter. And so you did know the negatives at the time as well as the positives. On race, you even talk about, at a certain point during the campaign, talking to him about the Central Park Five, trying to convince him that these young men were not guilty. What was his response when you tried to explain to him that the Central Park Five were actually not guilty?
What's interesting is Donald Trump tried to give me a history lesson about the Central Park Five, and he said they admitted guilt. They admitted that they carried out these acts. You weren't there, Omarosa. They actually pleaded guilty and said that they did these acts. And he explained that they didn't come, the truth didn't come forward for years later. And he felt that he was being judged by information he had at that time based on them being exonerated years later. When he explained that to me, I gave him the benefit of the doubt that there was a time difference. But what he's continued to do, now that he knows the truth, now that there is DNA evidence, now that they have completely been exonerated, and he still continues to hold on towards the hate and animosity he has against these gentlemen, it's unacceptable. And it shows you how illogical he is and how married to his hate he is.
And a lot of people, I think, have wanted to know sort of what was going on in your mind as you're watching things like Donald Trump retweeting Nazis during the campaign, David Duke coming out with this sort of full-throated support, the so-called alt-right glomming onto him. As an African-American woman, you're sort of the person who's being called upon to answer for this, to explain this to your own community.
Yes, and I talk about in the book how important it was to be that African-American that took him to task on every single one of these things. Sure, I could have quit and protest, but then there would be a void of a voice and someone to advocate for us. Right now, Joy, in the White House, there is no African-American representation. There are no African-American senior staffers. There are no African-American assistants to the president. And so they're making decisions about us without us. Now, people can agree or disagree whether or not there should be representation. I happen to believe there should be. It shouldn't be me because I'm out, but I'll tell you that we still need African-American leadership, African-American civil rights leaders to go and fight for the things that are important for advancing our community. That hasn't changed for me. We still need a voice.
One of the things that is stirring in the book is you write about what really was it for you. That you write about Charlottesville really being a turning point in terms of your perception of Donald Trump, in terms of you, as you said, sort of the cult kind of thing wearing off and sort of waking up. But at that point, that was the summer of 2017, you didn't resign. In fact, no one resigned in protest over Charlottesville. Do you now look back and wish that you had? You have a flair for the dramatic, as Donald Trump does. You learn from the best. Had you resigned as the only African-American woman staffer in the White House, as the senior most African-American in the White House other than Ben Carson, if you had resigned, it would have been a tidal wave. Why didn't you resign?
Yeah, the reason I didn't resign is because there were 100 students, 100 representatives from historically black colleges and universities. They're called HBCU All-Stars. And I had been preparing this conference that was going to happen in September, the White House Conference on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. And I called Armstrong Williams and I said, I'm going to quit. This is it. I'm done. And he said, you can't let those students down. You've been working. You can't just leave and protest. You have to find someone to take your place. You have to find a way to make sure these initiatives are carried out. Just like Gary Cohn, who stayed on after Charlottesville for months and months because he had financial issues on the table. There were issues that were important to me that I couldn't just throw up my hands. Sure, I could have left in protest, and yet those students would have never had the experience of a lifetime to come to Washington to see how government works firsthand. I wouldn't have had an opportunity to go to the UN. I wouldn't have an opportunity to continue to work on issues of Haiti, of Flint, all of these things that were important to not just throw up my hands and leave. But I certainly knew that January 20th of 2018 would be my kicker, the end of my time in the White House. Unfortunately, as you see in the book, General Kelly decided that the Situation Room would be a better way to end my time in the White House, locking me there. and making threats, saying things will get ugly for me and there would be damage to my reputation.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's all in Unhinged. I think it's important for people to read the entire story and not just take little slivers of it, because this is my life story and this is a true journey of how I overcame so many obstacles to get where I am today.
No, it is a full story. I mean, for those who have not read the book yet, and it's a bestseller, so a lot of people have already read it. But yeah, you do go through your entire life story. You talk about John Kelly. You open with the firing, with being pulled into the Situation Room in order for John Kelly to fire you. And you write a lot about him. Do you think John Kelly's racist?
Oh, yeah. I mean, John Kelly thought the Civil War was about compromise. It wasn't about compromise, General John Kelly. It was about slavery.
You also write that John Kelly never met with you, that he never had any time of day for you. But you also write that you believed at the time that he was firing you that it was because somehow he knew that you knew that there was an N-word tape from Donald Trump's Apprentice days. How would he know that if he didn't even interact with you?
Because there's a whole email chain. You're the first one to ask me that, Joy, and I'm so glad you asked. Because as I've stated, everything that's in my book can be corroborated, it's documented and verified. On that day, the first email I sent that morning was to Hope Hicks, and Hope Hicks has, I mean, the email will become public because they're government emails. I sent an email to Hope explaining to her I was concerned about the chatter I was hearing, that someone was about to release this tape. Hope responds to me, and she says, we've already contained this, or we already dealt with this, which I thought was interesting. And because of that exchange, that happened in the morning at 10 a.m. By 5 o'clock, I got an email from John Kelly, assistant, saying that he wanted to meet with me in the Situation Room. It's hard to ignore the coincidence that I had that exchange in the morning, and by the afternoon or the evening, he was locking me in the Situation Room, making threats.
Very interesting. I definitely would love to read that email.
Yeah, tons of emails about that, and the White House knows this. Hope Hicks knows that, and I'm sure John Kelly knows that.
I have to ask you this question because you do mention having the emails. You've released some tapes. You have some video and some audio tapes. When you went into the White House, when you took that job, did you have the intention of ultimately writing a book? Is that why you kept so many recordings and made so many recordings?
No, my intention was to serve my country. When I took my oath to the Constitution, to this country, I took it very seriously. This is my second tour of duty working in the White House. I know the importance of working and serving for your country and trying to help improve the lives of African Americans throughout our community. And so I took my job very seriously. I am an author. This is my third book, so certainly this is what I do. I'd like to write about my experiences. But my intention was to serve my country and to do it honorably.
But you definitely were recording the whole time. And were you doing it with the intention of writing a book? I mean, there was an issue with April Ryan, who was a friend of yours for a long time, that you said was recorded. So were you recording with the intention of ultimately?
It's funny you mention her because, you know, no one has really even acknowledged the fact that the story that she manufactured in December has been debunked.
Has it?
I mean, I think it's pretty sad. It has. I mean, I have a tape of the beginning, from the moment I went into the Situation Room to the end.
But again,
her narrative is that happened in a different space.
Right.
But I don't want to spend time on her. It's a colossal waste of time. What I will say to you is that I wanted to tell people and give them an opportunity to see for themselves what's happening in the White House. Your taxpayer dollars go towards funding our salary and making sure that this country is run well. You have a right to pull the curtain back and see what happens in the Oval Office, what happens in the Cabinet Room, what happens on Air Force One. That's why I wrote this book, because people need to know about what's happening in a Trump White House. And I'm so glad that they're responding well. Obviously, it's at the top of the list, the New York Times bestsellers list. I'm glad that people are giving me their feedback. And Joy, I'm so glad that I had a chance to sit down and talk with you. Now I've got to run to go give a speech.
Yes, absolutely. I have one last question before we go. I know.
But I'm glad that we had a chance to chat after your vacation.
Yep. Well, this is my last question, because this is the most asked question that I get about you. And the same person that I spoke to sent me the Sammy Davis Jr. article, and it from the Chicago Tribune. And it says, maybe Omarosa deserves a second chance like we gave Sammy Davis Jr. As you'll recall, Sammy Davis Jr., it says here, lost his black card when he endorsed Richard Nixon's re-election in 1972 and hugged him at the GOP convention. He earned it back years later after acknowledging his mistake supporting a president that African Americans despised and renouncing Nixon for reneging on promises he made regarding civil rights. And respectfully, I ask you this, sister, because everybody that I talk to wants me to ask you, is part of your purpose writing this book to, quote, get the proverbial black card back as a way of saying to the African American community, I want to come back. I want to be back on your side?
First of all, I've never left. I'm a woman who grew up in extreme poverty in the Westlake projects. I have stab wounds. I have survived the worst type of atrocities you could see. And moreover, I made very clear decisions about how to educate myself at HBCUs. I continue to work in an African-American community in a black church. So that assertion that you can be stripped of your blackness, I am an African-American woman that walks around very proudly. You can't strip me of what I've been through, of what I've experienced, and moreover, I can't take this off or put it on. But I will tell you this, God is the author and finisher of my faith. He writes my life story. He determines my destiny. And I don't get into a trivial debate about whether or not someone accepts me or not, because the only one I'm concerned about accepting me is that our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And when he says, "Well done, my good and faithful servant," then I will be pleased. That's the only person, Joy, I'm concerned about pleasing. And that's what I work towards every single day, which is why I'm running to go to a Woman in Ministry conference right now. God
Okay,
bless you. Thank you so
Omarosa
much for this time.
Newman, reminding folks that she got a theological degree and is a minister as well. Thank you so much, Omarosa. Good to talk to you.
Thanks, Joy.
Have a great day. All right. Well, two of Omarosa's fellow contestants on The Apprentice have been watching this interview. We're going to get their reaction next. Hey, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there for more AM Joy and the rest of MSNBC. And click on any of the videos right here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. And you can get more videos from MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.